Hey everyone, welcome back. So, if you are watching on YouTube, this is my very first solo episode in which I am recording video. So, bear with me. My, 30 years acting career probably didn't prepare me for this exactly. So, I'm going to do my best. And if you're just listening, then welcome back as always. And if you feel like checking in on the YouTubes, go ahead and do so because, if you want to see my face, come see my face. And if you don't, if you just want to hear my voice, my dulcet tones, go for it. Either way, you have choices now. All right, so today I want to talk to you about something that's been nagging at me for a couple of years, weirdly. So, okay. When my book came out, my I had a book launch event in Pasadena at Vroman's bookstore, which is an amazing independent bookstore. And my dear friend Samara Bay moderated it for me, and there was a Q&A afterwards, and somebody asked, "Where did you learn to communicate?" It was a really sort of poignant, wonderful question. They said, "Where did you learn your communication skills?" And in that moment, I froze and I was like, I don't know. I think I was just born with it. And I went home, and ever since then, this has been now, I think, 2 years, almost 2 years. I have been thinking about this and thinking, like, first of all, that's such bullshit. Like, I was not born with this at all. I learned my communication skills really they were hard won skills. And I sort of went home and I was just pondering it and pondering it and pondering it, and I was like, oh my God, no. I studied communication. Now, for those of you who don't know, communication is like one of my top skills. It is one of the things that I am best at. It is one of the things I'm known for. Susan Guthrie calls me the communication queen. I spend my life scripting conversations for my clients. This is a huge part of what I do with my clients. I literally script conversations for and with them. I'll just immediately say, like, well, I think you should say this. And they're like frantically scrambling notes about what I say, right? I am the one who has created the entire framework for how to have a conversation about how you're getting divorced, right? Communication is what I do. I used to teach communication skills at a corporate level, at investment banks, at Citibank, at BlackRock, at Goldman Sachs, right? I used to teach communication in these places. This isn't because it's just something I always knew how to do or was born with. It's because I fucking studied it. It's because I studied it hard and I learned these lessons very, very concretely over time. And for some reason, in that moment at my book event, I could not communicate that. Irony. Anyway, so I wanted to acknowledge here today, finally sort of out myself for that weird misspeaking. And then also I've been thinking about like, yeah, this is actually a really important topic that I should talk to you guys about. Most of us are not born great communicators. Uh, we're born, we can't even talk. We learn it, and often we learn it the hard way. Um, we learn it through trial and error. We learn it through, either having parents who are great communicators or are terrible communicators. We learn it by, in school. Now, communication is actually taught in schools, right? It's taught on the corporate level. What corporations learned after the 2008 financial meltdown, when all of the mortgage companies and other organization investment banks, they sort of had to do a bit of a post-mortem, like what happened here. I mean, besides the obvious that they were taking advantage of people. Um, But what also happened was, well, and as part of the taking advantage of people, what they recognized was the one thing that was missing in all of their training as investment bankers, as mortgage brokers, all of that, right? The thing that was missing was empathy and soft skills that go along with that, which include communication, which is why for a period, like going in and teaching these communication skills was my job. Because it was after that that they were like, oh shit, we need to, all the knowledge about banking and finance and all of that can only get you so far. The thing that takes you to the next level is interpersonal communication skills, soft skills, empathy, things like that. Um, what did I learn and how did I learn it? Um, I think the first place that I started to learn about communication was in couples therapy. I've talked a lot about the fact that my ex-husband and I did imago therapy, which is a very specific type of therapy. Um, I have, I think it taught me great skills, communication skills. I think it also misses the mark on a whole bunch of stuff. So I don't, if here's what I believe about imago therapy. If communication is really your problem, then it's a great form of therapy to go into in your relationship. But since abuse is not a communication problem and it's not a relationship problem, going into an imago uh, therapy environment with someone who's abusive and manipulative will only, as you know, look, you don't go to therapy with an abuser, period. But imago therapy in particular, it's like you're learning how to communicate and how to talk about your feelings, but that's not safe to do with someone who's abusing you and is actually not remotely interested in the empathy required to succeed in the imago process. So, um, imago therapy is um, it is a communication model, really, at the end of the day. It is and I've talked about this on the podcast before, but I think it was a long time ago, so I'll just go over it. It's a way of communicating. It's very structured. So if you have an issue with your partner, you say, I'd like to have an imago dialogue. Is now a good time? If they say it's not a good time, you shut up. It's not going to go very well, right? So this is a really key communication aspect, right? Which is that um, you need to be speaking, and in like landmark education, which is where I also learned some more communication skills, also very problematic program, recommend aspects of it, but ultimately don't recommend it. But I did it for a while, and one of the things I learned, right, they call it speaking into someone's listening. And essentially what it is this person primed to hear what you have to say? Is this person in a good spot? If you have just come home from a really stressful day and you just got fired from your job and you walk in the door and your spouse is like, we need to talk about blah, 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 and the way that you talked to me last night, you are not in any frame of mind to hear and absorb and receive what they're saying. So asking permission from the other person, hey, I'd like to talk about this issue, this fight we had. Is this a good time? That is respectful. And also, it's strategic, right? You're not going to lay stuff on someone who's not going to be able to hear it. And also, you're not going to get anything out of the conversation if they're not actually prepared to hear it, right? So the first thing you do in this imago dialogue is you say, is now a good time? Then you say, if they say yes, you give your communication in bite-sized pieces. The way imago therapy works is that one person is giving and the other person is receiving, which means that the receiver's job is to only receive and mirror. They do not get to rebut. They don't get to say anything, right? So I say, when we had our, I was really hurt by our conversation yesterday. And they raise their hand, like, that's enough information. And they say, you were really hurt by our conversation yesterday. And they're mirroring word for word what you said. And then you go on and say, when you told me that I needed to, get a job and make more money, it really hurt my feelings. When I told you that you needed to get a job and make more money, it really hurt your feelings. And then you continue, right? And so it's like that. It's give a little piece and it's mirrored. There is no response. They're not allowed to say anything in response. They're just hearing you. And then when you've said everything you want to say, you say, I'm done or whatever, and then they have to summarize. So what I heard you say was that when I, told you that you needed to get a job and make more money, it really hurt your feelings. You felt disrespected. You felt like I didn't um, uh, acknowledge the work that you do in the home and the amount of work that I am able to do with you staying home and taking care of things on the home front, right? So they are summarizing what you said, but in their own words. And then they say, is that right? Is that right? Did I get it right? And then you can say, yes. And I also said, blah, 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 blah. And they go, right. Okay. You also said that you felt blah, 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 right? And there's something interesting that happens because they're not trying to defend themselves. They're not arguing your point. They're not, um, there's no back and forth. They're just hearing you. And then they have to say, I imagine you felt, and this is where the empathy really kicks in because they've had to hear everything you've said and then hear the underlying feeling. I imagine you felt disrespected, unheard, sad, and scared. And you're going, oh my God, that's exactly how I felt. Oh my God, they get it. Or you say, no, I didn't feel those things. I actually felt really angry. And then they say, okay, you felt angry, right? So it's this very, now, a lot of you are listening and you're thinking, no fucking way could this conversation ever occur in my marriage. Like literally no. And many of you are correct. It couldn't because an abuser is not capable of that. Um, However, some are, right? And that's where like playing the game gets a little complicated because you think you're getting somewhere in your relationship, but you're not actually addressing the actual thing, which is actually you're abusive, right? Which is not a conversation for an imago dialogue, right? Um, anyway, the point is this skill of learning how to say what needs to be said is a learned skill. Um, and when you flip that around and you have to listen to your partner without defending yourself, without saying anything about, yeah, but you said, but yeah, but you, yeah, but you, like, no, there's none of that. You learn how to listen. And a huge part of learning to communicate is learning to listen. That's just what it is, right? And also listening, not just for what they're saying, but listening for what they're feeling. The other thing that happens towards the end of an imago dialogue is that you say, um, after you say, like, I imagine you felt X, Y, and Z. Um, then your partner says, I imagine that triggered your childhood wounding of X, right? Now, or you say, I can't remember if your partner says it or if you say it like that. It triggered my childhood. I think it's your partner that says it because this is where Imago, I sort of stray from the Imago process because The theory of Imago is that your partner can heal your childhood wounds just by sort of taking intentional action, right? If if it's like I imagine it triggered your childhood wounding of feeling unheard and unloved in your by your mother. Um, and then they take an intentional action. So you actually make a behavior change request of your partner and you say, it would help me heal my childhood wound of feeling unloved if you would come home from work each day and give me an appreciation. In Imago, there's something called a formal appreciation, for the work that I did in the home that day. So you could come home and say, I appreciate that you did the dishes and that you organized the linen closets and that all the laundry is done and I don't have to think about dinner. Right? So, and then they can deny or accept the request and they can rate it as like, yeah, that's easy. I can totally do that. Or like, ooh, that's actually hard because that'll trigger my childhood wounding of, you know, my controlling mother who always wanted me to appreciate her or something, right? But I love you enough that I'm actually going to um, work past my feelings so that I can provide this healing for you, right? And that's where it's like really empathic and loving and generous, right? And I don't believe that it's our partner's job or it's not really possible for our partners to heal our childhood wounding like that, right? They can make some inroads, but to heal it, I don't know. Well, um, and this entire process allows for a level of communication where if you are the receiver, you must leave your point of view, your feelings, your need to be right at the door. You just do. You've agreed to this process. And so in my world, it created an ability to listen, an ability to listen underneath the words for the real feelings, to also understand, right, the childhood wounding. Like when my husband was acting in a certain way, it wasn't necessarily because of me, it was because of, this childhood wounding that he had. Now, the flip side of that is it created more compassion for the wounding than it did for myself, as the victim sometimes of his abuse, right? So it's like, well, I'm only doing that because of my childhood wounding of blah, blah, blah. Well, you know what? Also, what you're doing is abusive and I don't care. Like, you know, so again, can be used for good, but can also be used as a manipulation tool in abuse, which is again why you don't go to therapy with abusers. But I learned how to we both did, listen for the feelings underneath. And, when your spouse says that the reason that they did something, or reacted the way that they did, or that like the way that you're speaking to them, because if you just said the way that you're talking to me is not okay and you need to stop, that's going to create defensiveness. If you say, the tone of your voice is triggering my childhood wound of when my mother used to abandon me or leave me or whatever. If you love this person, you go, it softens you, right? It opens up this compassion where you go, oh, I don't want the person that I love most in the world to feel that thing that they felt as a child. That's terrible. Of course, I'm going to try to intentionally alter my behavior so that they feel safe, right? Again, if communication is an issue, not if there's abuse, right? Um, Learning to communicate. I mean, I have dear friends who I have said, have you spoken to your husband about this thing that they're talking to me about? Have you spoken to him about it? Have you told him how much it hurts you when they ignore you or whatever, blah, blah, blah. And the response has been, I can't talk to him like that. I can't say things like that to him. And I'm like, well, if you can't say to your spouse, what, what you're doing is hurting my feelings, and is there a way that we might, work together to solve a problem in our home, then like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, that's not, to me, that's not a marriage. And it's not because they're scared of their spouse. It's because they just like, what? That's communicating. I don't do that. Well, um, then this is how you're going to live. And not just in this relationship, but in all relationships, right? So, um, the other thing about communication, I want to talk to you about there's a model of communication. Um, and it's sort of like you're sending information and then it's being received by the other person, right? And it is being received through a filter. That filter might be the traffic that they just got out of, which is why you ask permission to actually have this conversation now. The filter could be their childhood wounding. Their filter could be, the meeting that they had 6 hours ago that's still sort of gnawing at their brain, right? Whatever it is, your communication is having to move through this filter, and then it is landing with that person based on how you sent it, what the circumstances were that you sent it in, whether that was, we were sitting in the car talking, or, we're in the middle of an argument, whatever. And then the filter of whatever's going on for them, right? It's the receipt, they're on the receiving end. And then it's landing. And then there's this sort of feedback loop, which is they're going to let you know how it's being received. And that might be by their facial expression. They might be looking at you like, what the fuck are you talking about? Right? That's a feedback. If their facial expression is, I have no idea what the fuck you're saying right now, then you are going to have to alter your communication in order for it to be received. Clearly, this person isn't understanding what you're saying and they think you're crazy. So we don't just keep yammering away in the same way. When we're getting feedback that we're not being understood, we shift the way we're communicating. If I walk up to somebody who doesn't speak English and I start speaking English to them and they're shaking their head and looking at me in bewilderment, I don't speak English louder, right? And if you do, it's kind of crazy, right? I say, oh, this person doesn't understand what I'm saying. They speak a different language. What language do they speak? Do I speak that language? Can I communicate in that language? Or is there another way for me to communicate with them? And you kind of figure that out based on the feedback that you're getting. And then you alter your communication, right? It's sort of this circular thing. You alter your communication based on the feedback that you're getting so that it might land. Because at the end of the day, you want your communication to land, right? That's the goal. The goal isn't to keep talking in a way that, like, right, the goal is not, I'm just going to keep saying the same thing over and over and over again, louder and louder and louder. If you want to be heard, which most of us do, it is incumbent upon us to deliver information at a time that it can be received and in a manner in which it can be received, and then to be open to receiving the whatever feedback we're getting, whether that's words or facial expressions or physical mannerisms, right? Altering our communication based on the feedback we're getting so that it can be received. And sometimes the feedback is someone nodding their head, like, oh my God, yes, totally, man, right? And then you get more amped up, and then they get more amped up, right? Like you're altering your communication based on the feedback because you guys both get it and you're both so excited about this thing, right? That is a feedback loop too, right? So, um, when we don't do this, any of this stuff, right? The sending information in a way that it can be heard or um, acknowledging the feedback that we're getting. Um, that's how we have disconnection, miscommunication. We get defensiveness. We get misunderstandings. I don't know what you're saying. Because if I don't say to you, I have no idea what you're talking about right now, then like you can't be like then the person doesn't know to alter their communication, right? Um, and then we get like defensive and we get angry and all of the things, right? So, and again, this is for everything. This is for friendships. This is, co-parenting. This is my ex-husband and I had an imago dialogue in our mediator's office at our first mediation. And he was like, "What the fuck just happened?" And we were like, "Oh yeah, well, it didn't work to keep us together, but like, I don't know, maybe it'll work now." And it did, really. And this was about keeping the house. And my ex-husband had like a really good point about why he should keep the house. And I heard it in this Imago dialogue, and I was like, "Oh, huh, okay." And it changed my mind because I was having to listen. So the skills that I'm talking about here, right? Listening. Listening to understand, not just respond. Listening for the feelings underneath it. Um, Reflecting back what you've heard, right? Um, Even if you're not doing an imago dialogue, you can say, okay, wait, I just want to understand. I just want to make sure that I understand what you're saying. So pause for a minute. That's feedback, right? Can you pause for a minute? I just want to make sure that I understand what you're saying right now. What I'm hearing you say is XYZ. Is that is that right? Yeah. And they'll be like, yeah. And or they'll be like, no, that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm actually saying ABC. Okay, right? So active listening, listening to understand. And if you need to clarify with your words, then do so. Um, and then there's the nonverbal awareness, right? You're going to your tone, your facial expressions, body language, all of that, right? You can, when you're listening, if you're listening with your arms crossed and you're like, really? What? What? The feedback that you're giving the person who's communicating with you is no, I'm not interested in hearing you. If you're not interested in hearing the other person, tell them, you know what, now is not a good time. I am not open to receiving your communication right now. I'm just not. And I want to, but I'm triggered. So can we revisit this another time? Um, and if you are seeing this in the person that you're communicating with, if the feedback that you're getting is, I'm not fucking open to hearing this, then you say, it feels like you might not be open to hearing what I'm saying right now. Would another time be a better time for us to talk about this? And they might be like, no, because I'm not fucking interested in hearing what you have to say. And then you're like, okay, well, you're not going to push through anyway, because that would be bad. But also, that's just not a way to be in relationship. If someone says something like that to you, that's just not a way to be in relationship with somebody, right? Um, And then the other thing that is really important in communication is using I statements, right? You might say, when you said X, I felt. You're not saying you made me feel. You're not saying, you X, you this, you that, right? When you're communicating something, you're saying, hey, when we had this conversation, I felt attacked. You're not saying that they attacked you, because you don't know that, right? I felt attacked. And, right, a lot of problems come when we're interpreting the other person, right? So you might say, when we were having this conversation, I was interpreting that you were really angry. Was that right? You want to check out your interpretation. Is that right? Were you? Were you actually angry? Because it seemed like you were angry. And they'll be like, no, I wasn't angry at all. You're like, oh, okay. Um, then I took it that you were because you were raising your voice. So, the behavior change request might be like, when we have these kinds of conversations, can you kind of keep your voice lower? Because when your voice gets a little louder, I shut down because I feel like you're angry. And then I get scared and I shut down. And then I'm not able to hear what you're saying. Right? So you're keeping it about you. And any request that you make for a change in behavior is, again, about you. Like it would just help me to not react, as opposed to, you need to not yell at me. But I wasn't yelling. Well, yeah, you were. You were really angry and you were screaming at me. Well, if that's not how they felt they were doing, they're like, well, I don't know what to tell you because I wasn't. I wasn't angry at all. Right? So when you make your interpretations, like what happened, when you decide that your interpretation of something is exactly what it was, the other person is just now they're not open. Again, this is about remaining open to hearing the other person and you're shutting them down immediately. So just try to reframe things as an I statement. I feel scared. I felt attacked. Maybe you weren't attacking me, but that's how I felt, right? And then it again leaves the door open for the other person to be like, oh my God, I don't want you to feel that way at all. That's terrible, you know? Um, mirroring is another skill, right? The imago thing is very specific and controlled. And maybe if you're not in an imago process, that would be kind of crazy. So you don't do it. But you do want to mirror. Just try to mirror and be like, hold on, I just want to make sure I'm getting what you're saying. I want to make sure that I'm actually hearing you. I hear what you're saying is that that you feel frustrated when I um, close the door to the bedroom and you don't realize what I'm doing in there. I don't know, just making something up. Um, and then validating, like I can understand, I can see how you would feel that way. I can see how that could be frustrating. And you must have felt, right, putting yourself in the other person's shoes and using empathy to, to ask yourself, like, what might they be feeling, right? Not just if I were in their shoes, what would I be feeling? But if I were them with their life experience and their history, what can I imagine they must be feeling? Right? Um, so these are all skills that I learned over time in a very like a few controlled environments, but like over the course of like a decade, to be honest. Um, that I somehow forgot that I had learned when I was asked this question in my book reading 2 years ago. Um, but here's the thing, these skills, number one, did not save my marriage, but they saved my divorce. They absolutely saved my divorce, mainly because both of us were willing to employ them, right? Um, and we were both had been skilled and sort of trained in them. So um, it has it has absolutely affected for the good our co-parenting relationship over the course of the last 16 years. We communicate incredibly well, for the most part, except when we don't, which is very rare now. Very, very rare. Um, but for the most part, we communicate incredibly well, even through difficult shit, you know? Um, and it has enabled me to have healthy relationships. All of the relationships that I have or have had in the last 16 years are based on this level of communication, intimacy, right? Because this is a very intimate way to communicate with somebody, which is why I think some of my friends who I've had these conversations with are like, no way. It's like, well, if you don't want to be that intimate with your spouse, then that says something right there, as far as I'm concerned. It says a lot. Um, so it will impact all of your relationships, work, personal, friends, dating, right? When you're out there in the world dating in your next life, this is going to be really useful. Learning communication skills will be incredibly, incredibly useful. Um, so, and look, it's a practice. It is an absolute practice. And also, sometimes when you shift the way you're communicating with people in your life, they're like, what are you doing? Why are you talking that way? So you want to sort of say like, hey, listen, I'm working on these communication skills. So I'd like to try and have this conversation in a different way than we normally would. Are you open to that? Right? Asking permission. Are you open to that? Um, Send them this podcast episode. Hey, this woman was talking about communication and I thought it was kind of cool. You want to try it? Listen to this episode. So applying these skills, right? Start small. Just pick one tool to practice this week, right? Maybe mirror somebody in a conversation or choose to sort of summarize or, say like, oh, I can imagine that must have felt kind of awkward for you. I'm sorry. Um, and then notice the difference in the tone and outcome when you shift from reacting to listening to hear, right? Listening to be connected as opposed to reacting. Um, and then just again, be patient. This is a skill set built over time, right? It's not a personality trait. It's not something you just like turn on. It is a skill set that you develop over time. Um, so um, I'm going to um, give you a sort of practice prompts based on the stuff that I talked about. Um, if you go to kateanthony.com/communicate, there's a download for you that you can use that has practice prompts for active listening, I statements, nonverbal awareness, all of the things that I just talked about. So it's a free downloadable worksheet and you can get it at kateanthony.com/communicate. And if you have any questions about this, guys, if there's anything that you want me to talk about on the podcast, if you like my solo episodes, or if there's a guest that you want me to bring on, please send an email to info@kateanthony.com. Let me know what you want to hear about on the podcast. It's September. We're building up the editorial calendar for the next, couple of quarters, and I want your feedback. I want to know what you want to hear about. So, and if you like solo episodes and you're like, hey, just like turn on the mic and start riffing about X, Y, and Z. Oh my God, I want to hear it. Because sometimes I'm like, I want to do a solo episode, but like, what haven't I talked about? So, I am all ears. I love you guys. Thank you so much for being here. Don't forget to grab your download, kateanthony.com/communicate. And if you like the video format, let me know that too, because that's how we're going to do things going forward. I know it's not possible for everybody. If you guys, a lot of you are listening to my podcast in secret, in your closet, on your walks. Totally makes sense. Again, I've been old school. I'm like, it's a podcast. It's audio. But, the times they are changing. So I am rolling with the times here. All right, everybody. I'll see you next week. Talk to you soon. Bye.